Welcome to the Let's Get Vulnerable podcast. It's your host, Dr. Morgan, and today's episode is going to go deep. Are you ready? We are going to talk about internal family systems, IFS, and how it relates to attachment theory. And essentially, how do we look at the healing process through the lens of understanding the different parts of ourselves and the parts of ourselves that need to be healed in order to become securely attached. You guys know I'm an attachment theory nerd. I read attachment theory research articles for fun. I'm always, even when I'm watching cringy reality TV, I can't help but notice what people's attachment styles are. I love attachment theory. It is such a helpful way to understand relationships, and it gives us tools to heal so that we can have healthy relationships. And I also like this idea of looking at internal family systems as another helpful tool. And specifically, when we are doing the work of becoming securely attached, one of the steps that I walk clients through is we have to revisit the past. I don't believe in, oh my gosh, you can just manifest the relationship that you want. All you have to do is write the qualities that you want in a partner. Make sure you write it in red ink and then put it under your pillow. And then you're going to attract that partner. No joke, you guys. I went to a feng shui for relationships workshop just because I was like, what the F is this? I need to see. And that's what the person said to do. They were like, write it in red ink and put it under your pillow. Honey, if it was that easy, that's what everyone would be doing. We would have no issues in relationships, right? Like, no, we have to revisit the past. We have to get really vulnerable and willing to look at our relational woundings and our original attachment wounds. And I really love IFS as a tool to help us do that, as a way to revisit our past, right? So when I'm working with clients, I have a 4-part framework. And one of the first things we do is we revisit the past. And we do also a lot of self-compassion and reparenting. And IFS is a wonderful way to think about revisiting the past and reparenting. And what is it? How do we then move to the secure self? So we're going to explore this together. You guys ready? So I promised by the end of this episode, you're going to have a bit of an understanding on internal family systems, and you're going to be able to kind of link it to attachment theory and have a model for helping yourself heal and look at your past trauma. So if you don't already know, internal family systems has been around for a while. And I actually had Dr. Richard Schwartz on my podcast. You can go back. I forget which episode it was. I think it was like around the 400 mark. But he came on. He's the author of No Bad Parts. And then he also has some clinical textbooks. I had to read his textbooks when I was in graduate school getting my doctorate. So Richard Schwartz is an incredible thought leader in internal family systems. And I have applied his work throughout my time as a psychologist and relationship coach. I love his work. So, what is internal family systems? Let's start there. It is a model for understanding. I'm like, how do I say this? It's a model that views the mind as being made up of parts. And when we say the term parts, this is not to be confused with dissociative identity disorder, DID, where you have multiple personalities. That's not what we're talking about. But these are parts of the self, and the parts all have their own feelings, beliefs, and roles. And what is interesting is realizing that when you have parts that are not integrated, that you're not aware of, when you're lacking self-awareness, is that we can have all of these parts of ourselves that are actually hindering us, sabotaging us, being in conflict with one another. So if you have someone who's not integrated, they have parts of themselves that have not been either that they're not aware of, that have not been addressed, that still need to have processing done, right? So we have these parts, and the goal with internal family systems, when we understand it, is we want to understand all the parts of ourselves, have the empathy for them, and then integrate them and step into our highest and best self. And when we're connecting this to attachment theory, the self that is talked about in IFS is your securely attached adult, loving, compassionate, highest and best self, right? And we have to get there through integration. So let me pause for a second. All of my therapy nerds out there, you're like, yes, I love this. I love it. But if you're like, what the F? This is overwhelming. I just want you to understand this. One of the basic pieces that we know about healing, and this is just, you could look at all of the different therapeutic modalities, theoretical orientations, research, all healing work that has been done. Okay. We know this. In order to heal, in order to change, in order to grow, in order to experience transformation, we have to start with awareness and acceptance and compassion. Without awareness, without acceptance, without compassion, without those things, we simply maintain dysfunctional ways of being. So if I am someone, for example, with a disorganized attachment style, meaning I have anxious and avoidant attachment strategies happening at the same time, and I have this horribly painful experience in my relationships, if I don't first develop awareness of where does this come from? What part of me is enacting these behaviors? Why is this happening, right? If I don't start with awareness, it's going to be impossible for me to let go of the behavior, for me to ultimately then choose to align with my secure, highest and best self. I have to start with awareness. I have to go back to the root. And when you study IFS, let's get a little bit deeper into internal family systems. We realize that there are parts of the self that Dr. Schwartz labels as exiles, managers, and firefighters. And then, of course, we also have the self. So let's talk about these different parts. The exiles, these are your wounded parts. These are the parts of you that are carrying trauma. And these are probably parts of you that have been exiled, that you've been cut off from, that you're lacking awareness of. Okay. So for some people, if you've experienced sexual abuse, maybe you experienced childhood neglect, or you experienced chronic emotional invalidation, infidelity, I could go on and on. Any type of trauma, big T, little t, relational. And if you were not able to feel the feelings and process it and move through it in a healthy way, then that part of you is likely in exile, right? And once again, those difficult emotions are associated with these parts: shame, fear, sadness. Okay, what's a manager? We talked about the manager part. Managers are trying to prevent the exiles from being triggered by controlling behavior and emotions. So if you think about the manager part, this is like, like the critical mother, like I'm imagining like the mother figure that's uptight and wants you to follow the rules and wants you to be a good girl or a good boy, right? And this is that part of you that you've internalized of what I should do and how I should control myself, right? So this is often the part that tries to push away the exiles and ignore the exiles or any of your difficult emotions. And then we have the firefighters. And the firefighters, so these are the parts of you that when the exiles are triggered, these parts are trying to distract, numb. They're trying to do anything possible to help you cope. And this is often the firefighter parts is often where we develop disordered eating, addictions of any kind. I'm thinking about even overwatching TV. All of the numbing behaviors can come from the firefighter part of ourselves, right? And then we have the self. And what is the self? We all have a self, even though sometimes we feel like we're disconnected and we are lacking that connection to our inner highest and best self, but we always have a self. And the self at the core, it embodies compassion, curiosity, calmness, self-awareness, and the self is the leader of the parts. And the goal is that you, as the self, embodying that part of you, that you have awareness of all the parts and you've integrated them and you've calmed them and you have empathy and they're no longer getting triggered all the time and they're no longer running the show, so to speak. So this is an introduction to IFS. And what's interesting is just because I've labeled those three different types there, so the exiles, managers, firefighters, you have parts that are unique to you. So maybe within your exile part, that's your inner child, right? There's maybe a name. If you were called something as a young kid, there might be a name that you associate with that exile. I think it's important to realize that as you do this kind of work and as we help clients do this kind of work inside of the program, there's no right or wrong label for what you're supposed to call your parts. It's authentic to you. And you don't always have to feel like, oh, well, what category is this part of me in? It's more important to connect to the part than to quote unquote label it correctly. So for example, I'll tell you about a part that I have, right? That I've worked a lot to heal was when I was 6 years old and I went through losing my mom, and I still have vivid memories of the sound of the ambulance and waking up the next day and my mom's not there and the adults in my life breaking down crying. And I have that 6-year-old little girl part of me, that inner child that was scared, that developed fear and difficult emotions. And then my firefighter that would come out, right, when that little girl is triggered, the firefighter part that I have is probably this hyper vigilant, anxious people pleaser, right? And I can name that part. That can be the people pleaser part of me, the hyper vigilant part of myself. So notice how you can have the exile and the firefighters that can go together. And that's just one example. We all have so many different parts of ourselves. You could start doing internal family systems and realize, just that you have so many different parts. I was trying to find, and I'm sure if I looked a little harder, I could find this, but like on average, how many parts do people have? There's a lot. I think the goal is that you start gaining awareness, not that you get this perfect. Now, here's something that is a key piece to internal family systems. And also this is so key to the work that I do inside of the program. And a lot of you are going to say, yeah, okay, right? Like, I hear you. But this is so key. We have to approach ourselves and these different parts of ourselves, the parts that maybe your insecurely attached self, your anxiously attached self, your disorganized part of yourself. We have to approach it with compassion. If we're critical, right? If we are being the firefighter part or being the manager part, and we're saying, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. You're being too much. You're being crazy. Nobody wants to hear this. How dare you feel that way? I can't believe you're acting this way. Like all these inner critic voices that we have, right? If we're showing up that way, all we are doing is we're making those parts of ourselves stronger. The parts that are really struggling, the parts that are fearful, the parts that are not coping well. When we respond with criticism, we're simply making those parts of ourselves stronger. So in looking at your past and looking at your inner child and being really aware of these different parts of yourself, it's important to respond with compassion and love and understanding. And if I could tell you one thing, it would be this: the sooner you can get curious and compassionate about your trauma, I'm going to say those two words again: curious and compassionate about your trauma. The sooner you can do that, the sooner you can move through it, the sooner you can let it go. Right? In my own life, and I get to see this in hundreds of the clients I've worked with, that once I had awareness of what I had experienced, and once I really allowed myself to sit with the different woundings, whether it was from my early childhood or relationship trauma that I had experienced, once I had awareness and compassion, I was finally able to let it go. And if you really think about it, it's that secure adult, loving self coming in and saying, wow, I see you. I understand why you really struggled with this. I understand how painful this was. And I want you to know I've got you. I've got you. Right? Because part of the work that I help people do and that I've done in my own life is realizing this, that when you have woundings that have not been processed and you're not even aware of them, you still have that activated part of you that is always in fear that things are going to happen again, that you're going to be abandoned, that people are going to let you down, that you're going to let other people down. And you have this part that is constantly in fear, right? And if I don't have the awareness that that's happened, then that fearful part is just going to continue to sabotage and take over my life, right? So you have to get to this place where you have awareness. One thing I want to point out is that, let's say you had a highly critical, dismissive, chronically emotionally invalidating parent. Okay. And I know a lot of you have had that experience. So I'm just sending you so much love because I know how painful that is. What happens is when you have a parent that is not validating your emotions, that isn't that attuned, emotionally safe, reliable caregiver, when you don't have that, then what happens is you internalize that kind of parenting towards yourself. So then you've internalized an emotionally unavailable, critical, not safe parent. And that's how you then have started to parent yourself, right? So also in thinking about the work that I do, I'm always thinking about, well, what model did you internalize for a parent? And a lot of us internalize models that were simply really toxic for us. So part of doing this work and part of becoming your securely attached, highest and best self is you need to think about, well, hey, do I need a new model for my ideal parent? Do I need a new model for how I speak to myself? Because you had no control over the types of relationship models that you were given. You were given these people in your life and you internalized these ways of being. And you didn't get to, before you were born, pick out, well, hey, I'd really like to have Brene Brown as my mom. I'm just throwing that out there. I feel like Brene would be a very emotionally available parent, okay? But that's not how it works, right? Like you didn't get to pick who was going to give you your relationship models. So you internalize these ways of being, and part of becoming the securely attached adult and really attracting the relationships you deserve is looking at your relationship models and deciding that you actually want different models, right? You want to show up in different ways. So for a lot of us, that means we need to internalize a new ideal parent. We need to get really particular in asking ourselves, how do I want to be parented? What are my emotional needs? If I'm embodying my securely attached self and the self, as IFS calls it, then guess what? That parent actually needs to have a lot of compassion for the exiled parts, for the inner child parts of ourselves that have never been healed. And one thing I need you to realize is this. I'm going to see if I can put this into words. Sometimes I have these moments where I'm like, okay, I can feel this in my body. Does anybody else get this? I feel this in my body. I feel it in my brain. And now I have to try to put it into words in a way where you all can understand it. So let me see. If we have these trauma reactions, we have these triggers, right? We can get so caught up in our emotional roller coasters. And then what happens is, for a lot of us, is it's so painful and we don't ever want to go there again. And we put a lot of effort into our firefighter parts, our numbing parts, where we go, okay, I'm just not going to feel. I'm going to overwork. I'm going to overachieve. I'm going to drink. Maybe I'm going to have meaningless sex. I'm going to overspend. I'm going to travel all the time, right? Like anything done in excess and anything done to numb is not healthy, right? So we end up showing up that way where we are just avoiding. We're avoiding those exiles. We're avoiding feeling the feelings. But then what happens is you finally get to this place where you go, oh shit, I can't avoid these things. Or the numbing is getting so toxic for your life. Let's take an alcoholic. You're losing your job, you're losing your relationships, your friendships are falling apart. Maybe you're almost homeless, right? The numbing is getting so toxic that you can't numb anymore. And then you're forced to say, well, shoot, I actually need to feel the feelings, which this is what we help people do inside of the program. And it's what I think most people, I'm going to say 99.9% of people need support. You just can't do this by yourself. It won't happen. But anyways, so you get to that point, you got to feel the feelings. And then the funny thing is this, once you actually feel the feelings and you process those big emotions and you're writing out what happened in your life and you're sitting with your trauma. And once you've actually done it, you will be amazed at how quickly you feel differently on the other side. And how it's this paradox of, wow, I was avoiding this thing, and I was causing myself so much pain, avoiding feeling the emotions. But if I had just let myself feel and process, then I actually would, of course, go through pain for a short time because it's painful, but I wouldn't be in suffering. And I think you would be surprised at how quickly the pain subsides and you can start living a more aligned, securely attached life. So when we're working on this, you need to realize that part of the healing work is being able to feel the feelings and sit with the trauma And there are a lot of you who are like, well, I don't know if I have any trauma, or I don't know what feelings I need to feel. And I can tell you that your firefighter, your avoidant attachment style, your numbing strategies are probably really, really good at disconnecting you from what you're feeling or from the trauma you've experienced, right? So sometimes it's just about acknowledging, wow, I don't know what's here, but I know that there are things here that I need to process through and I need to let go of. And you'll be surprised that once you do slow down and you commit to the work, at the things that actually will come up once that space is created, right? So I hope this has been really interesting for you to think about. I'd love to hear from you if you've realized, oh, wow, I have these parts of myself that I have been numbing, right? I think as homework for you in starting this process, I would just love for you to think about, huh, what are the parts of myself that maybe I've been avoiding? Is there anything that needs to be processed so that I can integrate that exile? Because once again, what you realize is once you feel through things and you process the trauma and you have that parent, that ideal parent part of you that is soothing the inner child part of you, then you still have that inner child part, but when it's triggered, when it's activated, it's so much easier to soothe. It's like it becomes a baby wave instead of a tidal wave, instead of a tsunami. When you have made space for that part to be heard and then it can be integrated, it gets to live in harmony with you. And of course, there's going to be moments where it wants you to know something, or it has an emotion it's feeling, or a thought it needs to express, but it's not going to derail you. You're not going to be forced to numb what it's feeling. You'll simply be able to self soothe and emotionally regulate through anything that comes up from those wounded parts of yourself. Okay. And then obviously, as we're integrating and we're becoming this highest and best version of ourselves, we step into secure attachment. And this is not to say that we never acknowledge our past relational trauma, that we're not aware of what's happened to us, but we simply decide I'm no longer letting my past trauma determine my present relationship experiences. I am intentionally deciding how I'm showing up in my relationships, and I am showing up as my securely attached, emotionally regulated adult who is aware of her parts and who is deciding to show up differently, who's deciding to show up secure, right? And I just want you to know there's always hope for you. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know, Dr. Morgan, I think it's too late for me. I just want you to know it's not. It's not too late. It's always possible to do this work. It's always possible to become securely attached. And obviously, I'd love to help you do that. You know, we have the Empowered, Secure, Loved relationship program. We have limited spots. I would love to help you do the work. And if you're ready, all you have to do is go to the link in the bio and click apply, and you can apply to the program today. It takes 2 minutes. All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This was fun for me, kind of nerding out a little bit on the theoretical orientations. And if you were like, oh my God, I need to know more about Richard Schwartz and internal family systems, go check out his book called No Bad Parts. It's a great book. And then if you want to be super nerdy, you could get his book, No Bad Parts, and then my book, Love Magnet. And those would be an incredible back-to-back read. I'm telling you, that would be like an incredible journey for you to go on. I would start with his and then read mine after. I think that would be very helpful. But I am just cheering you on. I hope you love this episode. And of course, as always, I'm wishing you high self-worth and great relationships. Until next time.